Hello and welcome to the third Super Team Fantasy Football podcast. This is for week 7. I'm your host, Brandon DeFreitas, as well as your commissioner. And on today's episode, we're going to do a little bit of a week 6 review, followed by some Friday injury recap. So it's Friday today, and we can go through some of these injuries that have developed. Normally, we like to do a Wednesday show here. We got a bit delayed. Some interesting things going on this week, including some golf with our current number one team, Mark. We have our podcast mascot, Millie, making an appearance. But we're going to usually do Wednesdays, just a little Friday this week. And going third here, we'll talk about interesting moves around the league this week, followed finally by a guest appearance from former league commissioner John Cannellos. So let's jump right into it with the week 6 review. And really, three main points to talk about from week 6. Number one, a game that we talked about as the game of the week last week, John and Mark. John had a strong start with Julian Edelman in the Thursday night game, putting up over 20 points. But Mark came through with the 140-95 win over John's squad. And that's pretty much how the season has gone for Mark so far. He has Lamar Jackson, who ran for 150 yards last week. And I mean, what more is there to say? John's just run into a lot of points. He's over 100. He has the most points against in this league, and the closest team to him is 100 less points scored against. So it's just sometimes you have those years, and John's hitting that regression hard from the championship. I am as well, but I can't make the same claims in terms of points against that John is, and unfortunate to see, but hopefully, for our pick here to win the championship in the first podcast, hopefully he can find a way to get it going. Looking at the matchup too, Jared Goff scoring 1 point for John's squad was definitely the difference between Lamar Jackson, who put up 30. Mark's rest of his team, he had the Patriots defense go for 24, Lamar Jackson at 30, and then Carlos Hyde at 18. Those are the high scores. And the 1 point for Goff sunk John. McCaffrey had 21, which is nice. Edelman with the 20. But when your defense puts up 5 and the other defense puts up 24, and then your quarterback puts up 1 and the other quarterback puts up 30, that's basically the difference in the game right there. And it's unfortunate, but just went down. I would like to point out Aaron Jones came a little bit back down to earth. He dropped an easy touchdown pass, would have been 30 plus yards, and he ends up with only 8 fantasy points. So after totally stealing my soul for saying he was a bust, he goes out in week 2, dominates. He now is back to earth, or it wasn't week 2, but week 2 of the podcast. He returns to earth a little bit, and hopefully this continues. I said last time that Jamal Williams is going to have a bigger role, and Jamal Williams had a real solid game last week. So there's a chance that this is kind of the new norm going forward. All right, another thing to point out about last week's matchups: Will Tam improving to 5-1. He has the least points scored against, but it's hard to really get you criticize him when he goes out and he puts up 155 points scored. And we'll cover his matchup later on in this segment. He looks like he has a strong team, and he has a team with Robbie Anderson, who's going to get real hot here soon. And I expect Tam to make the playoffs and be one of those teams that's competing for the championship this season. Furthermore, one of the nice things about this season is that the standings are wide open. There's no team that has less than 2 wins, so everyone's still in it. 2 and 4, you're still in it. We have, in fact, 5 2-4 teams, followed by 5 3-3 teams. Will Tam at 5-1 and Mark at 6-0. So it's really, look, you might be down and now and not feeling too good, but every team, including Kenny's, can still make a run going forward. Following through too on some of the top points for teams. Your highest teams with points so far is Mark, unsurprisingly, John at 2. So John has second most points for, and he's ranked 8th. Definitely, there has to be some regression coming forward for him. Will Tam is third, and you can see why he's 5-1. He's third in points for, and he's the least points against. Will Tam least points against, followed by Crawford, and then followed by Mark. Highest points against, you're looking at John, followed by VJ, and then Chris McNamara. Oftentimes that's the way it works out. The teams that have the most points against are going to tend to be at the bottom of the standings. Teams with the least points against going to be at the top. Seems like points for, there's a little bit more disparity. It's, just who do you play this week? And this season's definitely been a little bit wacky where you have defenses putting up a ton of points, even in our format. And, some quarterbacks you have a lot of quarterbacks struggling on epic proportions like Jared Goff and Baker Mayfield, and some quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson and Russell Wilson who are going absolutely fire right now. And while we're on Russell Wilson and Lamar Jackson, we may as well bring up what was in a bet between myself and John Cannellos, and on under the vampire settings, which means that it's 4 points per touchdown pass. I made a bet last week that Lamar Jackson from that point forward through week 17, or it might have been through week 16, I could follow through, but that Lamar Jackson would outscore Russell Wilson in that fantasy format. And it's interesting. I think they were both neck and neck last week. They both have great matchups this week, so we'll see where it goes from here. The 4 point per touchdown pass might seem to give Lamar Jackson a little bit of an edge because he has more rushing and will get more rushing touchdowns that are still 6 points. Whereas in a 6 point per touchdown league, it might be a little harder to make that bet for Lamar. All right, moving on to our next segment here. Friday injury recap. Again, the Friday show, so it gives us the opportunity to go through our injuries for the week. And the big one was last night. Patrick Mahomes had a kneecap dislocation. We're being told the MRI was good, as reported by Adam Schefter, and that the best case scenario is he returns after 3 weeks. The Chiefs, though, have 4 weeks until their bye. So it seems to make sense that they would play out those 4 weeks, have the bye week, give as much time as possible to Mahomes, and then maybe he returns after the bye. But I think the interesting thing you're reading online about the kneecaps, and David Chow at Pro Football Doc on Twitter, former team doctor of the San Diego Chargers, gives out a lot of this information for free, which is great. And he's been saying the biggest thing with this kneecap dislocation is there's a chance that of re-injury, and it's a matter of if they can find a brace and stabilize that knee to the point that they're confident there won't be a re-injury. And then for Patrick Mahomes, a player who's just on his rookie deal, and he's on tap to be the highest paid quarterback or highest paid player in the history of the NFL. Is it worth it for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs too to risk going out there re-injuring and not being the same player going forward? We saw that with RG3. I think there's a little less risk with Mahomes only because he's such a dynamic passer, whereas Robert Griffin III, a lot like Lamar Jackson, relied on his legs to open up some things in the passing game. Mahomes can still play from the pocket, but his mobility helps him improvise, and it's not good for the league if this is something that lingers. And whereas it wouldn't be good for the NFL to miss him the rest of this season, at least you'd have him for the rest of your career. So we'll see what happens there. But right now, it seems to be trending towards missing 3 weeks at least, and then returning. But again, we saw with Saquon Barkley, sometimes the reported injury and the diagnosis on Twitter doesn't always hold up, and the player can beat that. So open on Pat Mahomes. Hopefully he's all right, and that's what matters most. Todd Gurley, questionable for this week. McVay said today that he thinks he's going to play. He expects him to play. I would expect to see Todd Gurley out there as well. It looks like Malcolm Brown's going to miss the week with an ankle injury, meaning that Darrell Henderson is an interesting start against an Atlanta defense we'll highlight later in the podcast too, that just is bleeding points, especially to running backs out of the backfield. And I just don't think they're going to give Gurley a full workload. He's clearly not going to be 100%. And the one game he played greater than 90% snaps was the game where he came back out and had this thigh injury. So look for Henderson to get involved, especially in the passing game, making him a little bit interesting, but it's kind of hard to trust putting them out in your lineup. Big news today, Alvin Kamara was announced as out. Latavius Murray will start against the Bears. Not the best matchup for Murray, unfortunately, but you'll see here in the matchup segment that John is starting Murray this week in his lineup and should be a solid running back too. Finally, David Johnson is a game time decision for Sunday. All right, on to our third segment. We're going to talk about interesting moves around the league this week. And the first one involves my team. Last week, dropped $21 late in the week on Rashad Penny. John bid 6, so I went heavy after a player that I like a lot, and I think the reason I like him is there's talent there, and it's on a run heavy team for behind a running back, Chris Carson, he runs hard and he gets banged up. So I wanted to hold Rashad Penny, but unfortunately, it's 5 player benches, and after dropping $21 on him the week before, I released him this week. Thought it was an interesting move to highlight, and certainly not the best use of free agent acquisition budget on my part. But part of the fantasy football is being able to pivot and not always hang on to some players that don't compound a mistake by continuing to make a mistake. And that leads us into another interesting move, which was Edwin adding Antonio Brown this week. Look, I mean, Antonio Brown's a great player. If he returns and gets in a good situation, he can certainly make an impact later. But, Edwin's kind of, not saying it was a mistake, but the pick he used on him in the draft didn't work. And I think it's just compounding what already, a situation that wasn't good for his team by continuing to hold them. Because let's say Antonio Brown gets signed in 2 weeks, and how soon is he going to play and make an impact? He has to get signed, he has to get a rapport and start playing with his new team, then getting targets. Just seems like a lot to happen before the end of the fantasy football regular season. Maybe playoffs, he could be up to speed, but we don't even know when he's going to return. The big pay of this week. So John had the big overpay of the week and the value of the week. We'll start off with the overpay. And I don't think it's that bad because it's going to be a defense who's past their bye and it's going to be good for the rest of the season. And that's the 49ers defense. $26 John added the 49ers defense for. I mean, definitely a heavy bid. I bid $11 and thought I was really throwing it down. John gets them for 26. A little bit of an overpay, but again, great matchup this week and could make a difference in his lineup. They're playing Washington, and Washington's been just an awesome offense to play your fantasy defense against. His value of the week, though, $1 for Latavius Murray, a player who's going to start in a very creative offense for one of the best coaches in the league, in my opinion, and Sean Payton. So while it is the Bears, that is a great ad for $1. I tried to go in on them for $1. I think John must have had a tiebreaker or something, or maybe I bid 0. But awesome addition for John there. And finally, Crawford adding $12 to start Ben Watson. I just don't think Ben Watson's a pass catcher in this Patriots offense. And I'm not being literal in that sense. Obviously he is, but I think they brought him in for more of his blocking, whether, both on the line of scrimmage and also to cover some of the fact that you have Devlin and Jakob Johnson injured out for season. So Patriots need someone who can play in the backfield and block for Sony Michel. Ben Watson's done that in the past and could do it again. I just don't think he's worth adding in fantasy, let alone dropping $12 for. All right. Well, with the interesting moves complete, we're now going to move in and get a call from John. All right. Welcome back. And in this segment, we have our former commissioner, John Cannellos, on the phone. John, how are you doing?
In life, I'm doing great. In this league, not so much. How
Well,
are you, Brando?
I'm doing all right. I had a nice little round of golf today. Shot an 87 par 70. So not every day
Nice.
I crack 90.
was gonna say 90's kind of a benchmark there,
Yeah, for sure.
so that's good. Well, I want to thank you for doing this podcast. It's been awesome to listen to. It's also nice to step back from the commish role once in a while and just focus on the football. I don't think there have been any controversies for you this year,
Not
so
not yet. As soon as we got rid of Justin Williams from the league, the whole thing just kind of slowed down controversy wise.
yeah, there's no Justin Williams, there's no Rob Sullivan, so those are two troublemakers. But hopefully that stays. Nothing worse than what we had to do in baseball or
Yep.
whatever nonsense comes your way as commish.
We gotta call it how it is too. Like I'm definitely one of the troubled children as well.
With the trades once in a while.
Yep.
Although I blame Mark for those.
For sure, definitely some controversy in fantasy baseball. Speaking of Mark, we're gonna go through the matchups again here, and this week's flavor, we're gonna be talking to John about bye weeks. So, looking at our first matchup here, we have Mark at 6-0, absolutely taking bodies in the league. Beat you last week too.
Yep.
And now I'm sitting here a week 2-4, tied for the worst record in the league, playing the best team record wise in the league, and doing it without Odell Beckham, who's on bye.
Yeah, that's tough. Get off the tracks if you're playing Mark this year. He's just dominating in both leagues. He had a pretty good year in fantasy baseball too, if I remember correctly. So maybe it's just his year, the year of DeMellon. He did get promo this year, right?
He did. He's a senior manager now.
Yeah, it's the year of Mark. So I'm glad I only have to play him once this year, unless I see him in the playoffs, which isn't looking likely right now, but early days.
Looking at his team this week, he doesn't even have someone in the wide receiver 3 position.
I did notice that.
Which is an interesting, situation to have. I guess like he'd probably put Philip Dorsett there or Christian Kirk if he's healthy.
Yeah, got it. Kirk's been dealing with an injury. I would go with him though. He's so good. That Giants Cardinals game is going to be big score.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it looks like he already had Travis Kelce play, only 10, so you kind of caught a break there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Mahomes injury, and that'll be talked about in this pod as well, really just slowed down that Chiefs passing attack for the rest of the game. And Kelsey probably would have been a good bet for a touchdown if Mahomes had continued to play. So I'll take 10 points in a PPR.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you made a good call not starting Damian Williams. 2.6 points. Jeez.
It's clear Andy Reid has a thing for LaShawn McCoy, and that's just going to continue. So
goes back to their Philly days.
Yep.
Beatty was making it rain.
Mm-hmm.
It's prime. But yeah, so really good start for you. And I mean, Mark's not going to go undefeated, so he's due. You're due. So this could be a Brando upset here.
Yeah, right now the projections have me by 2 points, but that's considering the empty wide receiver spot. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see.
Definitely not a ideal situation for me starting Alan Lazard and Cole Beasley, two guys you're not usually going to start.
Yeah, well, they have good situations this week. Cole Beasley with a great matchup. Cupcake City down in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got Alan Lazard. He might be their wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think MVS, Adams, and Geronimo are all going to be out this week.
Yep. The Packers wide receivers have been so difficult since the heydays of Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb and
They sure have been.
The James Jones when he was a beast.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if it's not Devontae Adams, it's nobody. Doesn't make any sense. Like, Rodgers is supposed to be good. TB12 would make lemonade out of those lemons. Speaking of DeMellons.
Yep.
But I don't know. I mean, let's see. You got Josh Jacobs versus Aaron Jones. Michael Thomas versus Julio. This is pretty evenly balanced. Frank Gore versus the Dolphins for Mark is
Yeah.
pretty critical for you. He
Unfortunately,
goes,
a player you usually don't worry about, but in against Miami with a 17-point favorite, I believe that's at home too for Buffaloes. That's
mm,
huge for Gore.
yeah. I mean, it's tough. If you get a big Julio game, decent Will Fuller game, Evan Ingram's back, if he outscores Kelsey, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. No Odell hurts, but the way he's played the last 2 weeks,
Right. And,
almost.
and considering all the buys we have this week, one player down really isn't a huge difference maker compared. I mean, I'm sure as we go through these other matchups, I know Marco for one has a bipocalypse, so
Oh god.
can't really complain.
Yeah, actually, Mark doesn't have anybody on by this week. I don't
Yeah,
think.
go figure. Go freaking figure.
I don't think he. Or last week he had Marlon Mack, and I still lost to him.
Yeah,
He still put up 140. So
man,
that's Mark just has a good team.
he does.
His bench is good. Jamal Williams on the bench, which hopefully that he continues to eat away at Aaron Jones's workload.
Yeah, that would be huge. Definitely talked about a lot on this podcast, and we're hoping it continues.
That was the annoying thing for me last week. Kelsey, Aaron Jones, Marlon Mack all
Hmm.
essentially did nothing, and I still lost.
Oh
And Frank
man,
was on a bye.
yeah,
Even though
brutal.
I lost. My team should have been. But
Hmm.
anyways, yeah, I think we're looking at potential upset here.
All right, that's what I like to hear.
Yep, yep.
Guess we'll move on to the Will Tam Mike Crawford matchup. Will Tam currently at a 62% win probability. Got 20 points last night from a
Oh
stream
my
start of the Chiefs defense slash special
goodness,
teams.
that is so Tam. Like, they, I was gonna say they had a defensive TD, didn't they?
They did. And I mean, like, you look at what they've done this season. They've only had 56 points on the season, so they get the 20-point effort here in week 7. Their highest output before that was 13, then it's 9, and then it drops all the way down. They've had 4 games 5 points or under. And
And they were away.
yep.
They traveled to Mile High, notoriously tough place to play, and
Mhm.
they just worked Joe Flacco.
Well, it looks like Tam's a heavy favorite here. Russell Wilson playing that leaky Baltimore defense.
You know, oh,
Although
that sucks.
one
I think
interest
Kamara is out.
Yeah, one interest. Yeah, for Tam, Kamara out might make a difference in a swing, but I'm guessing I don't know if his projections are still being included, but
I'm not seeing him. It shows zeros. I think he's officially out. Actually,
yep.
let's do a quick little Google search here. Saints rule out Alvin Kamara.
Wow.
So that's huge for Crawford.
Mm-hmm.
Sucks that Tam didn't know that because he probably would have started Royce Freeman in his 17 points.
Yep. So it's either Ito Smith or Tyrell Williams is also out. I guess this is where Bipocalypse becomes fun because Mike Evans is on a bye. Royce Freeman he can't play. Tyrell's out, and it's down to Ito and Gardner Minshew. So Tam's gonna have to make a move here before Sunday, I'd
Gonna
imagine.
have to. And as somebody who's been looking at waivers, that is not good. I'm starting Duke Johnson this week,
Yeah.
so that's what it says about waivers.
I mean, we just covered me with Cole Beasley and Alan Lazard, so a
Yep,
lot of that going around.
yep. But, I mean, Tam's team looks pretty good. This is Russell Wilson, Chris Carson combo is lethal.
Yep.
Kevin Coleman's picked it up with a great matchup this week.
Robbie Anderson, I can't see him doing anything against Stephon Gilmore. I know his numbers are awful against Gilmore historically, too.
Mm-hmm.
But going forward, the Jets have a cake matchup. I think
Yep.
they play the Jaguars next week, and that's without Ramsey. And then they play Miami twice in like the next 5 games. So Robbie Anderson's gonna go absolutely haymakers for a Tam team that's already 5-1.
Yep. So things are still looking up for Tam. Unless he starts getting some points against regression, this is looking like another win.
Yeah,
Crawford's team is good, though.
It's good. I just you got to be able to do better than Ben Watson. I don't think the Patriots brought him back to be a pass catcher. I think they brought him back because they lost both fullbacks,
Oh
and
yeah,
Watson can play a little bit in the backfield.
yeah. Looking at his bench, he's got Greg Olson and Vance McDonald on a bye.
Yep.
That's tough.
Rostering three tight ends with a five-person bench too is a little tough.
Jeez, his running backs are really good. Crawford does have a really good team. Ooh, Amari Cooper might be out. That could be huge for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Gotta.
A lot of open items in that matchup. I know we did picks last week. We all missed our picks this week. But part of the problem with making picks against the spread is we're here on a Friday. I think Wednesday is our usual day for the pod, and we still don't even know what people are playing on Friday here. There's still a lot of openings.
So I don't know. With the information we have, I gotta lean Tam in this matchup.
I'm leaning Tam as well. I think he'll be able to find some replacement for Kamara. He could drop either Minshew or Ito Smith and pick up some. I don't know. Doesn't have to be a running back. There are a couple of interesting receivers that I won't mention on the pod to
Yeah,
help out our
can't give
five.
away.
Not for the 5-1 team.
Yeah, can't give away trade secrets. The
Yep.
only chance Crawford has is if Saquon goes for 50.
Which he could against Arizona.
Is very possible.
That
So,
Saquon and Murray could combine for 60 plus points in this format easy.
yep. So, but for now, it's got to be Tam.
Yep, agreed. All right, next matchup: Sandy Clammers, Wilhelm Travers versus Chris McNamara.
We got another empty spot. Travers without a tight end.
And on the other side, Chris McNamara has a tight end who is out this week in Jared Cook.
Yep. He's got. So that's interesting. We're looking at Gerald Everett versus Trey Burton in the tight end spots for these two.
Let's go. Welcome to bye weeks. And then
Travers really playing with a hand behind his back this week. Adams out, Chubb by, Godwin by.
Yep.
That's brutal.
He still fields a half decent squad too. I mean, adding DJ Chark and then Fitzgerald in the late rounds too. What interesting too, Deshaun Jackson's in his lineup. I think Deshaun Jackson's officially out.
Yeah, he's projected for 0,
So
that's 4 players on his roster who he can't use. Chris Thompson on his bench, I think, is also out. So he's going to have to fill that flex spot off of waivers. Yikes. Jeez, that's crazy. That's like 5 players out of his, 16 people who can't use this week.
Yeah.
Damn, that's rough. Although he can throw someone in the IR spot. That's good. What?
Tough week out there. This is making me think, John, before we post the cast this week, we're going to have to go in and make any moves we want to make on the waivers before because there's about 3 or 4 this 3 teams we've already mentioned that still have to make an open move for the week.
I know. I'm hoping we'll start to see some shakeups, people dropping some guys with these bye weeks. And
that's what the short benches will do for you. It doesn't allow you to just stash people all season.
And Travers, Cowboys D versus Philly. That's a tough matchup. Not looking good for Travers this week.
Luckily, though, Chris has some tough matchups. Le'Veon Bell versus New England. Didn't really do much last time against them. And then Allen Robinson's going to be locked up by Marshawn Lattimore in the New Orleans matchup.
He's got Gurley, Cooks, and Cup. That's counterproductive in my opinion. But it is the greatest show on turf.
And helpful against that Atlanta defense, which is almost insulting to the word defense to call them such.
Crazy that going into last year, they were actually touted as a good defense.
I know, right?
Totally fell apart.
It's all of that Deion Jones and Keanu O'Neal, and I think Keanu O'Neal's out for the season already.
Yeah, that sounds right.
It's one of those defenses where if they lose one of those 2 guys, the whole thing falls apart.
Yep.
Might be time to fire Dan Quinn.
Yeah, he's a special case. What do we got? We got Chris projected to win. He's got a mix of terrible matchups and really good matchups. I don't know.
I'm gonna lean Chris just because Travers has tough bye weeks, a lot of injuries, and I just think that Atlanta game could go over 60 total points. I could easily see like points in the high 30s for both squads for the Rams and the Falcons, and
Agree.
that'll be one of the weeks where being heavily invested will help Chris out, but it certainly can backfire on him in other weeks.
Like last week when Jared Goff scored 1 point,
Yep, exactly.
78 yards passing.
He also might want to consider moving on from Rivers, playing at Tennessee, tough defense, and Rivers, even when he's in a good matchup, really only like caps out in the mid 20s for points.
Yeah, their offensive line is so bad. Their entire offense is just stuck in the mud right now. It sucks.
Yep, totally agreed.
Well, Chris's other quarterback is on bye, Baker Mayfield, who's the more I look at it, I actually like Chris's team.
Hmm.
Kenyon Drake. So yeah, I don't want to bet against Travers because he's a fantasy savant, but it's not looking good. He's got to start David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen,
Hmm.
two running backs on the same team, weak offense. Just lost Kyle Long, their best offensive lineman.
Yep.
New Orleans defense has been pretty good lately. So, yep, I think we're going Chris here.
Yep. I am as well.
So, what's next? What's next?
Moving on to the next matchup, we have Marco versus Edwin. Battle of the other side of the office where you
Yeah,
used to sit. It's now
yeah.
down. It's pretty much down to Marco and Edwin. Randy's on sabbatical, and
Sherman Randy. The only person to not get promoted and go on a sabbatical. Touche, Randy.
yep, touche. Can't say I miss him though, and I'm fine putting that on YouTube. Looking at the bye weeks in this one, a couple of buys for Marco. He has Juju Smith-Schuster, Curtis Samuel, and Ronald Jones out. It's a lot of players, but none of them are really high end players. Juju was supposed to be, unfortunately, really hasn't had that kind of season. And we have Edwin sitting there with no buys. Just again, for some reason in fantasy football, Edwin always seems to come out smelling like a rose. He's done more research this year, so I won't body him too hard, but he usually has that below average team that somehow has a decent record.
I feel like last year is pretty good. I remember it was the year that David Johnson broke his wrist in week
Yep.
one. Despite that, Edwin still went like 8-5.
that's
Like I don't
actually
know how he did it.
that's actually pretty brutal because now that I think about it, it might not be a fair statement from me because of the David Johnson thing, and he was the Antonio Brown owner this season.
Yeah, yeah. He still owns him. Wow. Still holding on for dear life.
Well, I think he explained to me this week that he doesn't want news to come out and then him not to benefit from Brown. So I think
Right.
he really needs to find a way to let it go and just be like, I'm done with Brown. I'm not thinking about Brown, and I'm not interested in Brown."
I mean, at the same time, I want to see his. If I go to his actual team page, if he's gonna get into a buy situation where he has to do it, I think someone might pick him up. Let's see. No, Edwin's pretty clean on buys. He doesn't have any weeks that are horrible,
Hmm.
so you might be able to hang on to him long term.
Yeah.
But
I think the tough thing is you don't even know when it's going to be resolved. I know Brown said he was hoping in the next few weeks. Let's say best case scenario, Brown is signed in 2 weeks' time. So it's week 7 now. He's signed in week 9. A player like Brown would probably play right away, but not a full allotment of snaps. So you figure week 10 he's not playing full. Best case scenario, it's week 11 and you're getting Antonio Brown out there with little to no rapport with his quarterback. So I
mm-hmm.
mean, by the time the fantasy playoffs comes around, he's getting rapport and he's starting to contribute for your team. But a lot needs to break right for him to make any significant fantasy impact this season.
Oh yeah, and there's the whole thing about losing his mind
Yep.
too. So got to contend with that.
hmm
All right, I guess what this actually might be game of the week. Marco versus Edlin.
I think it's the early favorite. I mean, both teams have
Yeah,
interesting players. Gallup on Edwin's side is going to be the number one for Dallas if Amari Cooper is out.
yep. And in terms of projected points, this is the highest combined projection. So
Mm,
that's pretty nice. This is game of the week.
hard hitting analytics right there. Yeah, we'll dub it game of the week right now.
Both
Philip
good
Philip
squads.
Philip Lindsay a disappointing 4.2 for Edwin in a matchup against Kansas City. I think we all expected him to smash.
Oh yeah. I mean, look at Carlos friggin' Hyde last week, 100 yards and a touchdown against the Chiefs, and then Philip Lindsay gets 4 points.
hmm Crazy.
That's disappointing.
Yep.
But what is that? Almost 13 points lower than his projection.
Wow.
That hurts. In Edwin's words, I've already lost.
Yep.
But he's got good rest of the roster. That let's see here. Oh, he's got some tough matchups though. Zeke versus the Eagles, Carry On versus the Vikings.
Makes up for a little bit with the receivers. Lockett against Baltimore, Gallup against Philadelphia, Brown against Miami are three of the
Very,
worst pass defenses in the league.
very
But
true.
the running backs are definitely looking a little bit shaky this week.
Mm-hmm. Marco, let's see his matchups. Got some David Johnson versus the Giants.
Yeah, that's a smash spot.
That's big.
Couple
Bill,
a sneaky start right here with Dante Pettis at Washington. He's been his snap count has steadily risen, and Washington has no pass defense. In
is
fact, Josh Norman's now a corner you can target.
oh yeah, the demise of Josh Norman. He was so good like 4 years ago. Now he just sucks.
I remember we were making decisions a couple years ago on whether or not to play fantasy players against Norman, and now it's like, hey, target him.
You know. Let's see with Pettis. Oh, he had 6 targets last week. I'd be shocked if that wasn't a season high.
It is, yep, and 72% of snaps.
Yeah, maybe. I know he had a terrible camp. He is young. Maybe he just needed a little more time to figure it out.
There were some late reports that he had both a groin injury and was it a chest or pectoral injury too in the preseason. So,
Could be it. He's big. I think he's like 6'4".
hmm
Kind of he's slight, thin, but that could be a nice play.
he also was a college punt returner, and it might sound silly to bring that up, but that's one of those areas where you see these college punt returners have that quickness required to get open in the NFL. I know Antonio Brown's a good example. We can keep going. Pettis and hopefully N'Keal Harry proves that true too.
Edelman,
hmm
that is a good point.
I think
But
one thing that Marco might not be considering here, and it's hard to blame him for not considering this. Darius Slayton on the surface looks like he has a really good matchup against a weak Arizona defense. However, Slayton as the top outside guy for the Giants right now is going to be matched up with Patrick Peterson, who's returning from suspension.
Patrick Peterson.
So I
Yep.
don't know if I'd want to start a rookie undrafted free agent against Patrick Peterson.
Plus, Evan Ingram's back.
Yep.
Golden Tate's now a big target.
Mm-hmm.
Saquon's back.
Yep.
That could be a pretty disappointing start for Marco there.
Yep.
And Terry McLaurin also big downside on that one.
Mm-hmm.
San Fran D has shut down everybody. Marco can't really afford to sit him though. So
Mm-hmm.
Robert Woods, huge bust, but good matchup.
Yep.
The one Rams skill position player that Chris doesn't own. But no, this is going to be a good matchup. Rex Burkhead's an interesting start.
Sneakily too for Marco, Bill's defense against Miami that should help him out. I mean, when you
Oh
have
yeah,
Defenses have made way too big a difference in fantasy this year, so let's see if
It's
that continues.
I know I hate it, but it's nothing you can do because they're scoring touchdowns.
Yep.
Let's see.
Well, I know
Oh,
in this league we don't award any points for yardage, and you only get 5 points for a shutout. So we've
yeah,
lowered defensive scoring about as low as you can possibly make it, and they're still putting up points this season.
yeah. I mean, the Pats defense has just been a cheat code. It's just in all of my leagues, every person who has the Pats D is 4-2 or better.
Yep. And Mark's 6-0 in this one.
Yep. So Bills D will make a difference.
Not
Saints.
not that anyone cares about this, but in another league I have the Pats D and I'm only 3-3 because I have that post championship, John, of course, championship together,
Yep.
regression this season, and I have the most points against in that league.
The post championship curse is real.
Yep.
The two leagues I won last year, I'm 2-4 in both of them,
Oh
and
man.
top two in points against.
Wow.
So
Unreal.
yes, it's real. It happens. So all right. So if we have to pick this game,
I'm picking Edwin because of his three receivers matchups, and for the most part, he's starting all of his studs, whereas Marco had to come in and get some bye week fill-ins.
agreed. It's tough, but Marco just has a very low floor with some of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
So Edwin, it is.
Yep, agreed.
All right. What do we got?
We have
Team balls.
VJ, who's always his team has been team ball since he entered the league, and the golden.
I don't mind when somebody doesn't change their team name. This is hilarious.
And Tim has been the golden geese forever as well. So at this point, they're almost legacy team names.
Yeah.
Early good start, I would say for VJ because he gets 14.7 points from Cortland Sutton, and Tim had the unfortunate Patrick Mahomes injury, and he sticks at 9.2. And right now the projections are 138 to VJ and 98 to Tim. So Tim's going to need a lot to happen to come back here.
Yep. That that tree. Actually, VJ's got a really good team. Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, Hopkins, T.Y. Hilton,
Hunter Henry.
Yep. Let's see. Anything interesting here?
Really no bye. I guess the one bye week is Tim is missing James Conner, but on VJ's side he has the Panthers Dion bye and Deontay Johnson, so really not a big impact.
Oh yeah. Let's see. I guess. Let's see. I feel like it's got to be a VJ win.
Yeah, I mean he's heavily favored and he's heavily favored for a reason. The other thing I don't like is that you look at Tim's side, he has Adrian Peterson playing against that San Francisco defense. I would only play Peterson in plus matchups, and this is a very negative matchup for him.
Yeah. If you didn't start AP last week, you missed your chance.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Chargers D heading to Tennessee. Stephon Diggs versus the Lions. Mahomes just crushing blow.
Yep. And we're not 100% sure what Devin Singletary's role is going to be. They've been using a lot of Frank Gore, and Singletary's coming back from a hamstring.
I know. This is definitely a desperation start. I have Singletary in a different league, and there's no way I'm starting him until I see something.
I'm giving VJ, we'll call it the guaranteed win of the week.
Yep, this is the mortal lock. I don't see any way after that Patrick Mahomes letdown.
Yep.
It sucks for Tim. He also has Drew Brees, who I haven't heard much about Brees, but like week 10.
I believe he's tentatively expected after the bye. I'm pulling it up right now. Is that coming up? Are they on bye next week? They no, they have Chicago this week, Arizona, then the bye. I would expect him to come back in week 10.
Yeah, week 10. So he's pretty much naked at quarterback for 2 weeks, both
Hmm.
bye heavy weeks. We won't speculate on free agents, but that's going to be tough for him. He's one of those 3-3 teams that could fall out of the mix.
He is indeed.
Whereas VJ is looking great right now.
Hmm.
Ooh, Leonard Fournette versus the Bengals. Jeez.
VJ's a surprise 2-4. He's got to be one of those teams that has a higher points for and more points against.
Especially, yeah, he's second in points against, I'm pretty sure.
Hmm.
Especially after I put up 170 on him in week 1 and lost. Okay, I'm going to go on a selfish tangent here.
All right, let's do it.
VJ's bench, Sammy fucking Watkins. I played against VJ in week 1. He started Sammy Watkins.
Hmm.
He gets 47 points.
Yep.
3 touchdowns. Since then, 11, 11, 6, 0, and didn't play this week. Like, get the fuck out of here. And I played him in another league, too. So 2 leagues where I played against Sammy Watkins in week 1. That has to be the most unexpected, fluky start in the history of fantasy football.
Yep. Targets have consistently gone down 11, 13, 8, 6, and then he didn't play the last 2 weeks.
And then in that loss, where I scored 170 and lose, is the difference in my season.
Wow.
I win that. I'm sitting at 3-3.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking pretty. I'm getting AJ Green back soon. But nope, VJ had to ruin my lunch. I guess that's karma for quitting on all his clients. I feel like that's a little bit of the reason I'm getting some bad luck in this league. I abandoned my bros.
Well, that's all right.
I do.
A bro forever, John. I wouldn't worry about it.
Good, thank you. But that's my tangent. Talk Sammy Watkins. He'll forever be the most hated fantasy football player for me. Okay. Well, VJ's going to win.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Moving on to you versus Kenny. Now, it would be a very you thing to do this season to drop a game to, in my opinion, the weakest team in the league. In fact, he has 2 players on bye. I don't even know if he's checking his lineup.
Nope, he didn't start McCoy last night. If he was looking at his lineup, he likely would have started him.
Mm-hmm.
Starting Jason Witten at tight end, which he could very easily score a TD, but it's like, this is just one of those ones.
He's got DJ Moore and Jarvis Landry, both with buys, in his lineup.
And he got a decent start with Tyreek 16 last night. Obviously bailed out by that huge play, but his defense scored 1.
Mm-hmm.
So, Joe Mixon versus Jacksonville, terrible matchup. Derrick Henry's going to have a big day, but I'm looking at this objectively. There's no way I should lose this game, but it's me. I have Christian McCaffrey on a bye. Marquise Brown out. Although I did pick up Latavius Murray. That was a lucky pickup.
Nice. Actually, in an earlier segment, Latavius is our pickup of the week for only $1. I believe I also bid $1.
Really?
So I got outbid, or maybe I bid a 0. I can't remember, but I was going in on Latavius. I had him and I dropped him right before last week's games because Kamara was going to play, and I got duped because Kamara was only out there for a fraction of his snaps.
Yep. He scored a touchdown last week. If he gets me 10 points, I'm fine with it.
You also have Jared Goff in that Atlanta matchup, and I highlighted how I liked all the pass catchers there, especially against what really isn't a defense in Atlanta. Yeah. So you should be the main beneficiary there. And huge defensive matchup too, 49ers against Washington. Should be at least 1 defensive touchdown happening in that game.
That's what I'm hoping. Give me 8 to 10 points there. It's just my top 2 running backs, Eckler and Duke Johnson. That is terrible. The Eckler thing really pisses me off. It'd be one thing if Melvin Gordon was like killing it, just taking all the work, but they go from this productive offense, winning games. Eckler's looking like a star. Then Melvin Gordon pussies out on his holdout, comes back like 3 weeks before anyone thought he would, and
Yep.
just totally kills their offense.
Oh yeah, absolutely destroys it. And like you said, it'd be one thing, but unfortunately, Eckler's been dominating, and Melvin Gordon doesn't look good at all. And we've seen this before with some players. And in fact, the Chargers, I don't. It's probably about a decade ago at this point, but Vincent Jackson back in his heyday with the Chargers
Yep.
sat out through week 10, and everyone held him in fantasy, and he
Mm-hmm.
returned, and he was honestly for the rest of his career, he was never really the same.
Terrible. Then he went to the Bucks, signed a huge contract.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible there too.
Yep.
But speaking of Chargers, Keenan Allen has probably been the reason I've lost the last 3 weeks. If you look at his game log, I don't know what's going on with it. He went 10 targets, 15 targets, 17 targets,
Yep.
and 5.66.
So
His points 26, 18, 43, then 10.65. I don't know what the hell's going on.
I've owned Keenan Allen for the last 3 years, and it's just kind of who Keenan Allen is. Like he runs hot and he runs very cold. And the nice thing is when he runs cold, you can try to buy him low. But when he really gets going in that offense, he's a world beater. The other thing is his target count historically goes down when Melvin Gordon plays, and unfortunately, I think it was that Miami matchup. Gordon didn't really play in that game, but
That was his first game back.
yep. So
And Hunter Henry's stealing targets now.
yep.
Mike Williams is getting targets.
Mm-hmm.
I think Keenan Allen was my third round pick. And
He'll still return value at that. And the cool thing about Keenan Allen, because I remember this last year, is he'll open his mouth if he's not getting the ball. He's one of those receivers. And I remember one game, I believe it was the London game. He threw a tantrum on the sideline, and then
yeah,
the next game it was like Keenan Allen got the 10 plus target squeaky wheel treatment,
I
and
think that was Thanksgiving last year, and he
mhm.
went for like 60 points or something.
Yep.
I need that to happen.
And he'll start complaining soon. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I need that.
I actually thought that Pittsburgh matchup was going to be the one went off on because last year against Pittsburgh plays a lot of zone defense and can't really you've seen it against the Patriots. They seem to have an inability to switch to man coverage. And the Chargers last year just had Keenan Allen covered by a linebacker all game against Pittsburgh, and he went bananas.
Yep.
But now on your team, he only got 6 targets and 2 receptions, and Hunter Henry got all the beneficiary.
Right. Got to be more efficient than that.
Yeah.
Give me 3 catches on 6 targets at least.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Not much else to say on this matchup. If I don't win, it's a real punch in the dick.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't win, my season's over. So
Absolutely. I mean, if we didn't have the automatic win in the VJ matchup, this is the next one here, especially if Kenny doesn't go in and replace his bye weeks.
Right. I mean, long time between now and Sunday at 1 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
1 p.m. But waivers are really bad. I guess he would just start both of those Titans wide receivers
Mm-hmm.
and watch him do that. And then Adam Humphries goes like 9 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown, and A.J. Brown goes 4 catches for 130 and a touchdown.
Yep.
That's the only way.
That's the only way. And, it would be something that would happen to you, but I can't
Yeah.
see it happening.
We'll see. We shall see.
So I'm leaning your direction in this one.
I will abstain. Actually,
That's a smart decision.
If this wasn't my team, I would have spent 2 seconds on this and just said no chance.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see. That's why they play the games.
Mm-hmm.
But that covers it. I need the win. I also need to separate myself from Kenny in the standings too. We have the same record.
Yeah. I wish I could do the same, but I'm against Mark DeMellon and the train that's going to run me over.
Yeah, you figure he'd take it easy on you with your good trade relationship. Mark is as cold-blooded as they come.
He's extremely cold-blooded.
and it's the year of Mark.
It
So,
absolutely is.
but yeah. So what do we do? We're thinking Cam over Crawford,
Mm-hmm.
Chris over Travers, Edwin over Marco,
VJ over Tim.
and
I'm voting you over Kenny.
okay.
And you are abstaining to hopefully not jinx it.
Well, I got jinxed last week, so hopefully it won't happen 2 weeks in a row. And I had a good start last week too. Freaking
Mm-hmm.
Edelman puts up 20 on Thursday night. I'm
Yep.
looking good. Christian McCaffrey scores 2 TDs. I'm looking good.
Mm-hmm.
And then nothing. But then we say, yeah, I think we said Mark's gonna. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Mark's
I'm not
gonna
gonna
beat my
jinx you.
team.
Mark's gonna win.
Yeah, Mark's gonna win.
I'm gonna,
I'm gonna vote against myself.
regardless of what I think, Mark's gonna win. So.
Oh
All
man.
right.
Well, thanks for joining the podcast, John, and congratulations on your upcoming life event. I know.
Congratulations to you on the engagement.
Oh, appreciate it.
Formally. So, yep, I got the baby due date 1 week from today.
Oh
Great.
wow, coming up.
Yep. So, all right. Well, this is my first podcast, so it's probably objectively terrible, but you've been doing a great job, Brando.
I appreciate it. Hey, this won't be the only time we have you.
Yes.
Hopefully, we can have you when you're officially a dad as well. And good luck in your matchup. Hopefully, 3-4 and climbing to get back into it.
That's the hope. Well, thanks again, and
For sure.
We'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Catch you later, John.
Okay, bye.
And that was John calling in to the show. Thank you, John. A little humble at the end there. Didn't think he didn't think he did a great job. I thought he was awesome. I'm happy to have him, and hopefully we have him again in the future. And good luck to John and the baby on the way. Well, that's going to wrap it up here for our Week 7 podcast for the Super Team Fantasy Football League. Thank you for listening. We'll have you again next week. I will wrap it up by saying you might have noticed some changes here. We incorporated video. We have a new MacBook going on and a monitor. We're gonna have some jerseys in the background and certainly some stuff in the future. Quickly, making some improvements on the podcast. Keep it interesting for you guys and hopefully add some entertainment to the league. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week. Good luck.